Live from New Delhi, you're watching DD India News, India's voice to the world. I'm Lipakshi Khurana. Coming up in the next hour. UN calls killings of civilians in both Gaza and Israel horrific. UN chief says case for humanitarian ceasefire becomes more urgent with every passing hour. US President Biden talks to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, says imperative to protect civilians in the course of military operations. Netanyahu terms it as a global battle against the axis of terror.
This is not a local battle. This is a global battle. The paramount need is to defeat this axis.
Ukraine says focus is on Black Sea grain deal alternatives day after attack on Odessa port. As war drags on, EU officials eye talks starting next year with Ukraine and Moldova. And Iga Swiatek returns to world #1 with WTA finals win over Jessica Pegula. On to details now. United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres has called for an immediate ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict, describing the situation in Gaza. Guterres emphasized the need for a humanitarian ceasefire and increased aid to Gaza, stating that the crisis is not just a humanitarian one, but crisis of humanity. He also launched a $1.2 billion humanitarian appeal to assist Palestinians in Gaza, the West Bank and the East Jerusalem. Guterres condemned the violations of international humanitarian law and urged all parties to respect their obligations.
Gaza is becoming a graveyard for children. Hundreds of girls and boys are reportedly being killed or injured every day. More journalists have reportedly been killed over a 4-week period than in any conflict in at least 3 decades. More United Nations aid workers have been killed than in any comparable period in the history of our organization. Today, the United Nations and our partners are launching a $1.2 billion humanitarian appeal to help 2.7 million people. That's the entire population of the Gaza Strip and 500,000 Palestinians in the West Bank, including East Jerusalem.
Well, U.S. President Joe Biden and Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday discussed the potential for humanitarian ceasefires in the ongoing Israel-Hamas conflict. White House, in a statement, said that the two leaders discussed the possibility of tactical pauses to provide civilians with opportunities to safely depart from areas of ongoing fighting, to ensure assistance is reaching civilians in need, and to enable potential hostage releases. The U.S. President reiterated his steadfast support for Israel and the protection of Israeli citizens from Hamas and all other threats, while also emphasizing the imperative to protect civilians and reduce civilian harm in the course of military operations. And Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday said Israel was engaged in a global battle against an axis of terror. Talking to a group of foreign ambassadors in Tel Aviv, Netanyahu warned that the battle being waged by Israel against the barbaric Hamas terrorists in Gaza is one that could threaten Europe next.
The barbarism is led by an axis of terror. The axis of terror is led by Iran. It includes Hezbollah, Hamas, Houthis, and their other minions. They seek to bring the Middle East and the world back to a dark age. They seek to torpedo, to derail any progress towards peace and the progress and the promise that we had in our budding peace treaties with our Arab neighbors. If they go strong, if they're not defeated, they will derail this process. They will imperil the entire Middle East. If the Middle East falls to the axis of terror, Europe will be next, and no one will be safe. This is not a local battle. This is a global battle. The paramount need is to defeat this axis. That battle is now being waged by us against Hamas in Gaza. There is no substitute for victory. We will defeat Hamas. We will dismantle Hamas.
Also, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has said Israel has allowed tactical little pauses. In an interview to U.S. media, Netanyahu said that he anticipates Israel will have the overall security responsibility in Gaza after the war ends.
Well, there will be no ceasefire, general ceasefire in Gaza without the release of our hostages. As far as tactical little pauses, an hour here, an hour there, we've had them before. I suppose we'll check the circumstances in order to enable goods, humanitarian goods to come in, or our hostages, individual hostages to leave. But I don't think there's going to be a general ceasefire. It's not that I don't think. I think it will hamper the war effort. It'll hamper our effort to get our hostages out.
And U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has wrapped up his second visit to Middle East since October 7th. Blinken said efforts to secure a sustained humanitarian pause and greater constraint in Israel's retaliation on Gaza was still a work in progress. His comments on Monday followed a meeting with Hakan Fidan, the Turkish foreign minister, in Ankara. He will now head to a meeting of G7 foreign ministers in Japan, where he will brief colleagues on the U.S. approach to the crisis and its impact on Western standing. Well, diplomatic efforts are intensifying as the Israel-Hamas conflict continues to cause global concern. Our correspondent Amritpal Singh reports from Israel with the latest updates.
Israel has stepped up its military campaign inside the Gaza Strip. It took hold of a Hamas military compound, targeting at least 450 targets within the Gaza Strip. Now, Gaza Strip is a very, very narrow strip, 41 kilometers in length, at places 5 kilometers wide, at places 10, 12 kilometers wide, but that's it. It's a small place with a lot of people, 2.3 million people, and that's why you see such high figures. Till now, 10,000 dead, over 35,000 injured. So Israel says it is not ready for any ceasefire or humanitarian pause, even as Antony Blinken wound up his second visit to West Asia. He spoke both with the Israelis and with the Arabs. He was in Jordan, in Amman. He was also in Ramallah, where he met Mahmoud Abbas. Later, he traveled to Ankara, where he was categorically told that an unconditional ceasefire has to happen. So clearly, on the front of ceasefire or a humanitarian pause in hostilities, the U.S. diplomacy has not yielded to much, because Israel is not ready to listen. Yes, there is aid, humanitarian aid going inside the Gaza Strip, but UN officials say that is like a drop in the ocean, and that needs to be increased. The Israelis are amenable to that, but they say unless Hamas releases all hostages, they will not do a ceasefire. And Hamas is also saying unless the ceasefire happens, we will not release the hostages. So therefore, the situation here is stuck. Amritpal Singh for DD India in northern Israel.
Meanwhile, at least one person was killed in an Israeli airstrike on Al-Shifa hospital complex on Monday in Gaza. The strike has also left several injured. Denying the allegations of the attack, Israeli spokesman further said that it did not deliberately attack solar power panels on the roof of a Gaza hospital.
אנחנו לא תקפנו, למיטב ידיעתי, בלוחות סולאריים בבית החולים שיפה, אבל אנחנו עוקבים אחרי האופן שבו חמאס עושה שימוש ציני במתקנים הומניטריים, והאופן שבו חמאס עושה שימוש ציני בניצול אנרגיה של מתקנים הומניטריים לתשתיות טרור, ואנחנו נפרק את העניין הזה כדי שלחמאס לא תהיה אנרגיה לתשתיות הטרור שלו. כוחות ההנדסה מגיעים לכל אחד מהפירים, מתקינים בכל אחד מהפירים אמצעים שונים.
Well, the United States on Monday condemned as wholly unacceptable comments by a junior member of the Israeli cabinet who appeared to voice openness to the idea of Israel carrying out a nuclear strike on Gaza. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Sunday disciplined the cabinet member in question.
A ceasefire right now would not prevent Hamas from continuing terror attacks and firing rocket attacks at Israel in the future. And on the contrary, it would let Hamas off the hook, allow Hamas enough time to regroup, and we can't allow that. And no nation can be expected to tolerate those kinds of conditions. But one thing we have been very clear about, both the Secretary and the President, have been the need for a humanitarian pause to enable a sustained flow of aid and voluntary movement of civilians seeking to depart. And we continue to believe that it is important for all sides of this conflict to refrain from hateful rhetoric that is going to further incite tension.
And now let's take a look at other stories making news across the world with a focus on Israel-Hamas conflict. Well, combating attacks from Lebanon front, Israel's military targeted Shiite terrorist group Hezbollah on Monday, releasing a video showing 2 aerial views of targets being hit. IDF spokesperson said that the military will continue to have a significant response every time Israel is attacked. The retaliation came after a large barrage of rockets were fired at northern Israeli cities by the terrorist group earlier. In a display of solidarity, the walls of Jerusalem's old city were lit with photos of hostages held by Hamas. The faces of more than 200 Israeli hostages held by Hamas were projected onto the walls of Jerusalem's old city on the eve of 1-month anniversary of the Israel-Hamas conflict. 1,400 candles were lit at Jerusalem's Western Wall in tribute to the 1,400 victims of the Hamas-led terror attacks on October 7th. Israeli War Cabinet Minister Benny Gantz was among the participants. Another vigil took place in Tel Aviv, where tens of empty beds were presented in memory of hostages in the Gaza Strip. The event marked 1 month of the Hamas attacks. And updates now on Russia-Ukraine conflict. Ukraine's foreign minister said Ukraine would focus on alternatives to the Black Sea Grain Initiative on Monday. Speaking at a press briefing in South Africa, Dmytro Kuleba said he didn't see any encouraging indicators about the revival of the grain deal, and Ukraine would increase exports through European land routes.
We focused on 2 alternatives. The first one is increasing the capacity, increasing export capacity by land routes through Europe. We see the biggest potential in the route that will take our grain to ports in Romania, Bulgaria through the territory of Romania.
And as war drags on, EU officials eye talks starting next year with Ukraine and Moldova. The European Union executive will recommend the bloc open membership negotiations with Kyiv once it meets outstanding conditions on Wednesday. A senior Ukrainian government minister said Kyiv expected the European Union to provide a positive appraisal of its progress on the path to membership in a report this week. Well, in its 3 decades of independence, Ukraine has sought to forge its own path as a sovereign state while looking to align more closely with Western institutions, including the EU and NATO.
I think that for purposes of the assessment, when it comes to the 7 steps, everything which has been agreed has been implemented and done. Well, I would say that the assessment would definitely be positive because we have been in a permanent contact with the European Commission, discussing the steps and negotiating on the steps we've managed to implement. We were following the recommendations from the colleagues. We were listening to the opinions of the member states.
And still to come on DD India NewsHour. Top diplomats of Group of 7 nations to start talks in Tokyo. Talks to focus on Israel-Hamas conflict and China's increasing maritime activities. Trump testifies in civil fraud case in New York court, calls the trial real election interference. The rare, spectacular natural phenomena shows up at 2 places. We tell you ahead what, where and when.
Welcome to Jaipur.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India News. I'm Lipakshi Quran, and moving on. Top diplomats of the Group of 7 nations start 2 days of talks in Tokyo from Tuesday, the first such gathering since the Hamas attack on Israel. G7 leaders have started arriving for the meetings, and they are expected to exchange views on the conflict as well as China's increasing maritime activities. Japan will host its second G7 foreign ministers meeting this year after the one in April. Japan also chaired the September meeting in New York. Japan condemns the terrorist attacks by terrorist group Hamas. It plans to convey its call for a humanitarian pause as the Gaza district is on the verge of a serious crisis. The G7 foreign ministers are preparing to hold an online session with their Ukrainian counterpart, Dmytro Kuleba, as well as during their meetings in Tokyo this week. And DD India correspondent Chris Bilbert tells us more.
Japan is looking to round out what it views as a successful presidency of the G7, the Group of 7, this year. It does have one more ministers' meeting coming up in December for the Interior and Security ministers. But as you say, this is the second and last ministers or foreign ministers meeting being held in Japan this year. And look, it's looking to round out those issues you mentioned, helping each other to maintain individual economic and diplomatic ties with China, while countering, as they say, any change to the status quo in the Indo-Pacific by unilateral acts of force, which is their coded way of saying no invasions, looking to reaffirm their support for Ukraine as the G7 leaders did in May, very strongly and very clearly, and talking about how they can, further support Ukraine. In fact, Volodymyr Zelensky just the other week was saying that he was feeling a little bit forgotten about with all the brouhaha happening in the Middle East, and that, of course, is going to rocket to the top of the agenda as well. The Hamas attack had not happened when Yoko Kamikawa, the foreign minister of Japan, called this meeting. It is going to be, on the agenda, certainly some kind of joint, statement about how the G7 wants to pursue, and also their concern is going to be any spillover conflicts in the Middle East as well.
Well, Donald Trump has called a civil fraud case in New York election interference. During his testimony, the former president of the United States clashed with Judge Arthur Engoron on Monday in the Manhattan courthouse. Trump is accused of inflating his wealth to secure better loans from the banks. If he loses, he could be banned from doing business in his home state. Sally Patterson reports from New York for more.
Judge Engoron has already found Donald Trump, his adult sons, and some of his inner circle at the Trump Organization liable for fraud. Now he's trying to determine what damages the former president should have to pay. New York Attorney General Letitia James is also seeking to cancel Trump's business licenses in her state. And that could lose him many of his companies, including Trump Tower behind me. Donald Trump is accused of stating his apartment here was 3 times bigger than it really was. Similarly, prosecutors say his Mar-a-Lago resort in the U.S. state of Florida is worth somewhere between $8 and $27 million.
I had no idea what the numbers were when they said $18 million for Mar-a-Lago, and it's 50 to 100 times that amount by any estimation.
Trump said it was worth more than $400 million. Trump and his sons, who testified themselves last week, have sought to shift the blame onto their accountants. they say that banks should have verified their financial statements themselves rather than just relying on what was given to them. Trump also claims, as he does with several other cases he's facing across the United States, that the proceedings are politically motivated and designed to keep him out of the White House. He's running for president in 2024. Now, taking to social media on Monday, Trump called the case one of the many that's been instigated and brought by his political opponents, quote, crooked Joe Biden, for purposes of election interference. Speaking outside the court, Trump's lawyer, Alina Haber, she called Donald Trump one of the best presidents America's ever had, who has built a great company. She said that it's actually worth far more than the statements suggested, not less. She stated that the country is falling apart and called for an end to corruption in courtrooms, where attorneys, she said, are being gagged. Now that comes after the lawyer was told to sit down by the judge in the courtroom, who also demanded Donald Trump actually answer the questions being put to him rather than making long and at times rambling statements. This is a courtroom, he said, not a political rally. Sally Patterson in New York, reporting for DD India.
Well, Democratic President Joe Biden trails Republican frontrunner Donald Trump exactly a year before the U.S. election. Results of a poll showed that 5 out of 6 swing states favor Donald Trump over Joe Biden for president in 2024. Those states are Arizona, Georgia, Michigan, Nevada, and Pennsylvania. Wisconsin was the only swing state to show Biden ahead of Trump. Biden defeated Trump in all 6 states in 2020, but Trump now leads by an average of 48% to 44% in those states, the polls showed. And millions of Americans are headed to the polls today. And while off-year elections don't normally draw massive turnout or attention, with less than a year to go before the 2024 presidential election, this vote is being watched very closely. Tony Waterman has more.
Tuesday's elections will serve as a sort of crystal ball for 2024, a bit murky, but also yielding valuable insight into voter mindsets. Abortion rights in particular have been dominating the most closely watched races, including in Virginia, where the entire state legislature is up for grabs. A Republican win would clear the way for Governor Glenn Youngkin to enact a number of conservative policies, including a 15-week ban on abortion, with some exceptions. Democrats have been heavily campaigning on the issue, but so too has the governor. He's been trying to reframe this image of the GOP as extremists on abortion after more than a dozen Republican-led states outlawed the procedure. He calls a 15-week ban reasonable, and a number of other Republicans, including 2024 presidential candidate Nikki Haley, have also been trying to reframe this issue as well. In Kentucky, Democrat Andy Beshear, who is fighting to keep his job as governor in a red state, has also leaned on the issue. He has called the state's ban extremist and is reminding voters that he vetoed a 15-week ban on abortion. In Ohio, the issue is actually on the ballot. Voters in the swing state will decide whether to enshrine abortion rights into the state's constitution. The outcomes of these votes will be closely scrutinized by both parties, a litmus test on whether abortion is still a winning issue for the Democrats and if Republicans need to adjust their messaging heading into 2024. In Austin, Tony Waterman reporting for DD India.
Well, Italy plans to build centers in Albania to host sea migrants. The plan comes at a time when Italy is trying to bring down the migrant influx, which has nearly doubled in the past year. The new centers would initially host some 3,000 people after they become functional in spring 2024. The plan will exclude minors, pregnant women and other vulnerable groups. It aims to deter migrant departures and human trafficking and would specifically apply only to migrants rescued at sea by the Italian Coast Guard or Navy. In another instance, the Italian government granted citizenship to a critically ill baby girl from Britain to prevent doctors from weaning her off life support and allow her to be moved to Italy. And Britain's King Charles will deliver his first King's Speech today as he outlines the government's policy agenda for the coming session of Parliament. He's expected to announce proposals for new oil and gas licenses as well as changes to criminal justice and housing. Julia Chapman reports from London.
This will be the first state opening of Parliament since the death of Queen Elizabeth II. A year and a half ago, Charles, then the Prince of Wales, delivered the Queen's speech on his mother's behalf. But this is his first King's speech since becoming monarch. It's also the first for Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who came to power a little over a year ago and whose legislative agenda will be laid out by the King in Parliament. Criminal justice is expected to feature heavily, with legislation expected to be proposed on introducing tougher sentences for rape and other serious crimes. The speech will set out plans to rent places in prisons outside the country and to require convicted criminals to attend their sentencing hearings. Other areas are likely to include a staggered smoking ban, reform of the leasehold housing system, and a possible new football regulator. Although he's unlikely to betray any unease, there is one policy that could be difficult for environmentalist King Charles to announce. That is a plan to introduce annual auctions for oil and gas extraction licenses. Ministers say that will ensure jobs are maintained and that Britain has secure energy supplies. But critics say the government is backsliding on environmental commitments. The policies unveiled on Tuesday will set the tone for the ruling Conservative Party in the coming year and pave the way for the next party manifesto ahead of an expected general election. Julia Chapman in London, reporting for DD India.
And the European Space Agency announced on Monday it would hold a competition between firms to build a ship to deliver cargo to the International Space Station. It would be a potential first step towards independent missions carrying astronauts. The ESA's 22 member states, whose space ministers were meeting at a two-day summit in the Spanish city of Seville, also agreed to provide financial support for Europe's long-delayed Ariane 6 rocket. Europe also faces growing competition not just from the United States, but newer players India and China, as well as private companies such as billionaire Elon Musk's SpaceX. And now let's take a look at other stories making news around the world. Peru's Foreign Minister Anaxaselak Gervasi has resigned after less than a year amid questions over how she handled President Dina Boluarte's visit last week to the United States. Local news outlets reported that she was under pressure after failing to arrange a formal meeting between Boluarte and President Joe Biden. Her replacement could be announced on Tuesday. Mark Gauthier, a Parkinson's patient, received a Swiss-designed implant to improve his mobility. The device, designed by Onward Medical, uses an electrode field against his spinal cord and an electrical impulse generator to stimulate his leg muscles. The device is unique in its ability to target the spinal cord in a specific and flexible way. Northern lights, or aurora borealis, were captured in Mohe City, China, turning the night sky pink and green. The spectacle occurred after a G3 geomagnetic storm spanning from Sunday night to early Monday morning. Aurora borealis is caused by electrically charged particles colliding with atoms and molecules in the atmosphere. And Italy's Ministry of Culture said that they have recovered treasure amounting between 30,000 and 50,000 bronze pieces in an exceptional and rare state of preservation. Recovered off the coast of Arzachena in Sardinia, the ministry added that the bronze coins dated from the first half of 4th century AD. The aurora borealis, also known as the Northern Lights, illuminated the sky in the Italian region of Veneto. A time-lapse video taken from a webcam at Refugio Città di Carpi revealed a brightly colored sky. Collisions between electrically charged particles from the sun and particles in the Earth's atmosphere caused this phenomena. And still to come on DD India News Hour. Delhi equality remains in the severe category. India's Supreme Court to hear the matter today. In midst of a series of earthquakes, India sends second aid contingent to Nepal. And aiming to empower local artisans and promoting sustainable fashion, a natural dyeing workshop conducted in Srinagar by EcoKash. Welcome back. You're watching DD India News. I'm Lipakshi Khurana, and time now for a quick recap of the headlines. UN calls killings of civilians in both Gaza and Israel horrific. UN chief says case for humanitarian ceasefire becomes more urgent with every passing hour. US President Biden talks to Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu, says imperative to protect civilians in the course of military operations. Netanyahu terms it as a global battle against the axis of terror. Ukraine says focus is on Black Sea grain deal alternatives day after attack on Odessa port. As war drags on, EU officials eye talks starting next year with Ukraine and Moldova. Annika Swiatek returns to world #1 with WTA finals win over Jessica Pegula. Well, Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese said he was satisfied with the very positive engagement with China. The comments came after meeting with President Xi Jinping in Beijing on Monday. Meanwhile, Xi also said that stable ties between China and Australia served each other's interest and both should expand their cooperation. The ties soured between the two nations when Australia accused China of meddling in its politics in 2017. Albanese is the first Australian leader to visit Beijing since then. Albanese also said that the conflict in the world was raised in the meeting.
We have an interest in there being dialogue and in there being understanding. And one of the things that I raised, again, I went back to my Shangri-La speech that I gave, where I spoke about guardrails and military-to-military cooperation between the United States and China. That's important. I noted very much unimpeded trade was in the interests of both countries, was good for Chinese consumers as well as Australian exporters.
And for more on this, we're joined by correspondent Andrew Wood from Singapore. Well, Andrew, both Xi and Albanese have agreed to expand their cooperation and promote the development of their strategic partnership. They can become, they said, trusting partners. How do you see this happening?
Well, trusted partners, I think, is a bit optimistic. I think China has destroyed a lot of trust over the past 3 or 4 years with Australia. Australia, you may remember back in 2020, suggested it might be a good idea for there to be an independent international investigation into the origin of COVID. And Beijing didn't like that at all, and then started shunning Australian exports of things like coal, barley, wine, and so on, as punishment. Many of those have been those restrictions have been rolled back, but some of them still remain. So this is a start for them to be talking to each other. I think I think Australia was quite happy that a couple of weeks ago a prominent Chinese-Australian journalist was released from jail. There's still another writer, though, who's still in jail, and at least they started talking again. Australia needs China. Around about a quarter of its exports are to China. It's its biggest customer. And to a lesser extent, China does need Australia. It needs an awful lot of coal and iron ore and so on. And sometimes it's had difficulties trying to get that from elsewhere in the world. And it does show, I think, over the past few years, the limits of China's ability to use its economic power to coerce countries as well. So they need to rebuild trust. They say they're going to have a trusted partnership, But I think it's going to take a long, long time before the trust that was there 7 or 8 years ago when the last Australian Prime Minister visited returns.
Also, Andrew, we all know earlier Beijing's projection of power among Pacific Island nations had alarmed Australia, while on the other hand, the United States and Britain in the Indo-Pacific AUKUS stoked Chinese worries about containment. Now, how do you see this equation? Albanese categorically said that there are differences but also mutual benefit for both. Can you throw more light on this?
Well, I think there's a lot of diplomatic language there that may not, that covers up an awful lot of behind-the-scene discussions that may well have been a lot more complicated. I mean, AUKUS definitely worries China, this alliance between Australia, the United Kingdom and the United States, and Australia is going to be buying nuclear submarines, not nuclear-powered submarines, not submarines that can fire nuclear weapons, missiles and rockets. But that is worrying China, I think. But of course, with a lot of these things, as China has been more aggressive diplomatically over the past 5 to 6 years, then people in the West say, well, what do you expect? China has gone back on so many promises it made on things like, say, Hong Kong, and it's become more aggressive in the South China Sea. It's not surprising that some countries perhaps want to improve their arguments, their armaments, expand their arsenals to defend themselves against China. China seems to be more aggressive. The question now is, of course, is this starting an arms race? How will China respond in part if it feels like it's that foreign countries are trying to hem it in?
Right, Andrew. Thank you so much for that update from there. And moving on, another earthquake hit Nepal on Monday, soon after research and rescue operations ended for the 6.4 magnitude earthquake that hit the region on the 3rd of November. The focus has shifted to providing essential aid such as food, shelter and medical care to the survivors. The disaster has caused at least 157 casualties and left more than 200 people injured. 16,570 houses have been destroyed due to the earthquake in Rukum Pashchim district of Nepal. This number might increase as data collection is still underway in the district. The highest number of houses have been damaged in Ati Biskot municipality of Rukum West district of Nepal. And as Nepal tries to rebuild itself after last week's earthquake, schools are reopening in Jajarkot and Rukum West. The earthquake, which came last Friday night with 6.4 magnitude, has completely damaged over 90 schools, while over 120 schools damaged partially due to quake in 2 districts. Meanwhile, the second consignment of emergency relief for earthquake-affected families in Nepal have been handed over by India. 9 tons of relief material was transported to Nepal Gunj by a special Indian Air Force aircraft. The relief material consists of essential medical and hygiene supplies, tents, sleeping bags and blankets for earthquake-affected families. This is part of the Government of India's efforts to support the Government of Nepal in the wake of the earthquake in Jajarkot on the 3rd of November 2023. Moving on, after Storm Ciarán battered Western Europe, France is still under warnings of probable flood risk. French weather forecaster Meteo France has issued red alerts for areas like northern Pas-de-Calais and neighbouring Nord region. Heavy rain is also predicted in the southwest of the country, much of which was hit by Storm Domingos over the weekend, with a risk that some rivers could flood. The alert will remain in place till Tuesday early morning. Well, 500,000 residents of Sao Paulo remained without electricity on Monday, 3 days after a storm knocked down power cables, leaving much of the city in the dark. The storm uprooted hundreds of trees that fell on overhead power lines, cutting off supply to 2.1 million customers in the metropolitan city. Schools were cancelled on Monday in the worst-hit neighbourhoods of the city. Brazil's second-largest energy distributor, Enel, claimed to have restored its service to 76% of its customers. Yet a large number are still left without power. Brazil's Justice Minister Flávio Dino said the government will ask the company for an explanation for the blackout. Also, demonstrations broke out on the streets of Mexico City on Monday, demanding quick release of emergency aid allocated for Hurricane Otis. Hurricane Otis slammed into Acapulco 2 weeks ago, after which President Lopez Obrador unveiled a $3.4 billion Acapulco recovery plan and said the city should notice a difference by Christmas. But delay in the giving out of the aid to start the reconstruction of the port city has made the public upset. Well, Malaysian Foreign Minister Zambir Abdul Kadir, who is on a two-day visit to India, is scheduled to co-chair the 6th India-Malaysia Joint Commission meeting in New Delhi. The Joint Commission meeting will review the progress of enhanced strategic partnership with Malaysia in the area of political, defense, security, economic, trade and investment, health, science and technology, culture, tourism and people-to-people ties, and will also discuss regional and multilateral issues of mutual interest. Later in the day, Malaysian Foreign Minister will be meeting Indian Vice President Jagdeep Dhankhar, followed by a meeting with his Indian counterpart, Dr. S. Jaishankar. Well, the air quality across India's capital, Delhi, and the National Capital Region continues to be in the severe category on Tuesday. While Delhi recorded air pollution levels 7 to 8 times above safe standards on Monday, schools in the capital have been directed to suspend physical classes except for classes 10th and 12th until 10th of November. The odd-even car rationing system returning from November 13th till 20th to combat the severe air pollution. Also, the Supreme Court of India will hear the petitions regarding Delhi air pollution. On October 31st, the Supreme Court directed Delhi, Punjab, Haryana, Uttar Pradesh and Rajasthan to file affidavits listing measures initiated to control air pollution. The top court had noted that efforts to curb it in the national capital were not reflecting on the ground. The top court said that statistics reveal significant reduction in stubble burning events in Punjab and Haryana, however, added that statistics can sometimes be deceptive and viewed that the air pollution problem was persisting year after year. Well, for more, we have DD India correspondent Dibyendu Mondal from India Gate, and we have Vikas Sarthi with us from the Supreme Court. Well, Dibyendu, my first question to you, with GRAB 4 in place now, do you see any difference in the traffic and any difference in the air there?
Well, Lipakshi, you know, as far as the traffic is concerned, I don't see much of a difference. But, you know, the air pollution today has come down not significantly, but a marginal dip in the air pollution level has been recorded in Delhi for the first time today, post about 9:15 p.m. or in fact 9:30. The air pollution level, which is the PM 2.5, for the first time in the last 10 days went below 400 mark. But remember, in the morning hours at about 8 a.m. in the morning, the air pollution level still hovered at around 400 to 415, which is in the severe category. But as the sun rose through the day, the air pollution level came down to 390, which is in the very poor category. Also talking about the stage 4 of the graded action plan, which has been put in place by the Air Quality Management Control Commission. Diesel vehicles have been banned, commercial diesel vehicles have been banned in Delhi from entering Delhi. In fact, also schools have been shut down as part of the stage 4 of GRAP. Not only this, but also all polluting industries as well as construction activities have been put on complete halt. Diesel generators, which is also part of the graded action plan stage 4 action point, has been banned in the national capital. All these measures have been taken to mitigate the hazardous level of air quality that had been recorded in the national capital over the last 10 days. As we hear also from the weatherman, the western disturbances is likely to hit the national capital in the next 1 or 2 days, which could further bring down the pollution levels here in the national capital region. Back to you, Lipakshi.
All right, and now my next question to you, because Supreme Court has categorically asked states to list action taken to control air pollution. What is expected today?
Right, Lepakshi, the Supreme Court was of the view that despite the previous directions of the court from time to time, in fact, court has been hearing this matter for more than a decade now. Right. And we see that every year in the month of November, the air quality goes to very poor to severe category. And court was of the opinion that it seems that not enough steps have been taken by the state government despite the court's direction. So court has asked all the states, including Delhi, Uttar Pradesh, Rajasthan, particularly Punjab and Haryana, that what steps they have taken so far to curb the air pollution in Delhi NCR region. Two states have very important role. For Haryana and Punjab, there have been reports of stubble burning from these two states, though Haryana has reduced stubble burning numbers significantly, but in Punjab, the cases are still being reported. And today we expect that when these state governments will give a detailed affidavit, they will give particular numbers, how many incidents have been taken place so far in the states of Punjab, Haryana and Uttar Pradesh of stubble burning, and what steps they are taking to curb these practices. In fact, earlier also court had given direction to these states that these farmers should be given some kind of incentive to stop burning their stubble, and some commercial use can be introduced in these particular states. But what have been done so far by the state governments, we will be able to know once these affidavits are filed before the Supreme Court, and each state will give its detailed reply, what steps it has taken so far.
Right, all right. Debyendu and Vikas, thank you so much for giving us that update from there. And moving on, let's take a look at other stories making news today now. Voting is underway in the northern eastern Indian state of Mizoram to elect the 9th Legislative Assembly. Over 8.5 lakh eligible voters decide the fate of 174 candidates in the single-phased polling. Well, 10% voting has taken place till 9 a.m. for 20 seats in the state assembly elections in Chhattisgarh. 20 of the 90 legislative assembly seats in the state are witnessing polls in the first phase, while polling for the remaining 70 seats will take place on the 17th of November. EcoKash, in association with Roots, an environmental organization, organized a natural dyeing workshop in North India's Srinagar on Monday. The workshop aimed to empower local artisans in promoting sustainable fashion by showcasing the use of natural dyes in textile production. And still to come on DD India News Hour. We'll tell you the latest on two of UK's biggest strikes, UAW strike against Detroit 3 and Hollywood actors' disagreement. Office and workspace giant WeWork files for bankruptcy. And in the Cricket World Cup, Australia will clash with Afghanistan today. Both teams play on the back of victories in the last games.
Turning crisis into opportunity, transforming ideas into action, stories of real change, tales of sustainable solution.
This series is going to tell stories of such changemakers.
Watch Changemakers on DD India.
Welcome back. You're watching DD India News. I'm Lepakshi Khurana, and moving on to business news. The United Auto Workers Union announced that its members at General Dynamics in Michigan, Ohio and Pennsylvania have voted to ratify their tentative agreement. The ratification of the tentative 4.5-year contract, which provides a 14% wage increase, inflation protection, shortens the time it takes to reach the top of the pay scale, and defeating the company's proposed healthcare concessions, was approved by 74% of the members. The deal has put an end on more than a month-old strike in October by the union against the Detroit 3 automakers in the United States. And responding to the latest offer by the major studios, the Hollywood Actors Union SAG-AFTRA said on Monday that they have not been able to come to an agreement on a number of issues, including the use of artificial intelligence. With this, Hollywood Actors Guild strike entered its 117th day. The union said that the moderators representing Hollywood actors, after reviewing the offer, have formally responded to the major studios' last, best and final offer. The union also posted a statement on social media saying that they are committed to getting the best deal possible and ending the strike in a responsible manner. The union members walked off their jobs in July, demanding high remuneration in the streaming television time and security around the use of artificial intelligence.
They're ongoing. We're at the table all day, every day, and we are trying to get this strike resolved and get the town back to work. We're in the business of telling stories, and that's what we want to do every day. So it has grind to a halt for a few months, and so we're going to try our best to get things up and running and get the output back up for our fans too.
Moving on, WeWork, the SoftBank Group-backed startup, sought U.S. bankruptcy protection on Monday. The decision comes after its bets on companies using more of its office sharing space soared. Shares of the company have fallen roughly 96% this year as the company struggles with a massive debt pile and hefty losses. The company reported estimated assets and liabilities ranging from $10 billion to $50 billion, according to a bankruptcy filing. The company last week secured a 7-day extension from its creditors on an interest payment to win more time to negotiate with them. And on Monday, Facebook owner Meta announced that it has prohibited political campaigns and advertisers from using its new generative AI advertising products. The announcement was made in updates posted on its help center. Currently, its advertising standards restrict ads containing content that has been debunked by the company's fact-checkers, but have no specific rules on artificial intelligence. The policy change comes a month after Meta officially announced that it is expanding advertisers' access to its AI advertising tools. These tools allow advertisers to instantly create backgrounds, edit images, and change an ad copy in response to simple text prompts. Last week, Google also announced the release of similar image customizing generative AI ad tools, but with a caution to keep politics out of its products by prohibiting the use of a list of political keywords as prompts. Well, in a flesh blow to German restaurants and hotels, the government is set to end the pandemic-era tax breaks for the hospitality industry. The German government reduced value-added tax to 7% for restaurants in order to support them during the pandemic lockdown. But that will be increased up to 19% by the end of this year. The German Hotel and Restaurant Association said that some 12,000 businesses could close if the VAT rises. Furthermore, at supermarkets, VAT is due to remain at 7% for prepared meals. Well, Egypt's tourism minister said that the government is proposing incentives to boost its tourism industry in southern Sinai on the Red Sea, where the fallout from the Israel-Hamas conflict has so far been limited to less than 10% of bookings. He further said that despite some delayed reservations for the end of the year, Egyptian tourism was on track to earn more than $13 billion this year and reach a target of 15 million visitors. In order to retain the airlines and retailers' commitment, Egypt was offering an extra $500 of incentives for each flight that landed in Sharm el-Sheikh. While the rating agency S&P Global cautioned that a drop in tourism as a result of the ongoing conflict might cause severe problems in Egypt, Jordan and Lebanon. And on to sports news now. Australia will square off with Afghanistan in the 39th match of the ongoing ODI World Cup at the Wankhede Stadium, Mumbai on Tuesday. Australia made a dismal start in the ongoing tournament, suffering defeats in their first 2 games. However, the Pat Cummins-led side staged a stunning comeback, winning 5 games in a row to stake a claim in the top half of the table. A win in the upcoming game will help them secure their spot in the semi-final of the competition. Afghanistan, on the other hand, are coming off with 3 consecutive wins, beating Pakistan, Sri Lanka and the Netherlands, and are currently standing 6th in the ODI World Cup points table. The Hashmatullah Shahidi-led side will eye for a win in their upcoming clash to push for a semi-final qualification. Well, in tennis, Iga Swiatek regained her world #1 ranking on Monday. Swiatek dominated Jessica Pegula 6-1, 6-0 and won the season-ending WTA Finals in Cancun on Monday. Swiatek ends the season on an 11-match winning streak and will finish the year in the top spot for the second year in a row, having lost the position to Sabalenka after the US Open. 22-year-old Polish tennis star collected 6 out of a total 17 career titles this season as she retained the French Open crown to lift a 4th Grand Slam trophy. And in the realm of physics, one name shines brightly. Chandrasekhara Venkataraman, born in Tiruchirappalli, Tamil Nadu on November 7, 1888. Raman's journey from a young prodigy to Nobel laureate is nothing short of extraordinary. On his birthday, let us remember the man whose achievements in 1930 led to the Nobel Prize in Physics for unraveling the Raman effect. Well, that's all for this edition of DD India News Hour, but let us know your thoughts on the news of the day. You can connect with us on Facebook X, formerly known as Twitter and Instagram. We'll be back with more news as it breaks here on DD India. I'm Nipakshi Khurana from all of us here in Delhi. Thanks for watching DD India News Hour.